What's the creepiest obsessive thing you have done? I considered creating a throwaway for this story, but meh, it was pretty harmless, and I still think it was hilarious. I used to live in New York, and late one Sunday, 10ish, I was on the subway going back home. There was a young hipsterish couple embracing and kissing and talking, kissing and talking. It was gross and annoying. I mean, not really overly gross, but I was in a bad mood. And it was Sunday evening, and there was a lot of track work being done with a lot of stopping in the middle of the tunnel, and the usual 10 to 15 minute subway ride was taking forever. So anyway, we are finally approaching my stop. So I stand up and start moving for the door, and so does she, without him. As we both exit the train, she stops just by the doors, and they longingly stare at each other as the door closes. I'm standing behind her, and I make my eyes huge and make eye contact with him with an evil grin on my face. I point at her and mouth the words, "I'm going to kill her." As his train pulls away, his look of horror was brilliant. I knew he had at least 5 minutes before he could get off at the next stop, run up above ground, and use his cell phone to call her. Anyway, so then I just went home and ate a sandwich or something. I told my roommate at the time, and he thought it was horrible but hilarious. We discussed the possible long-term effects that I didn't take into consideration at the time. Like, the guy probably got off at the next stop, called her freaking out about some guy following her, and what he saw me do. Then she developed a complex about being followed, resented him for her complex, and they broke up. Or a million different scenarios. I do feel bad about it, but at the same time I find it hilarious. This wasn't me being creepy, but rather a customer being creepy to me. I was working at a department store in the fashion department, and a larger than most bold mid-40s man started coming in every day. At first he'd browse the whole department, then only women's clothing, then only women's underwear. He would ask me questions like, would I wear the ones with the pink lace? And I would never answer, but rather go and get my manager to deal with it. It got to the point where he would come in and try to get me behind the clothing racks where the cameras don't reach. But of course I would just stay behind my fashion desk and politely ask that he approach me if he had any questions. Then she started getting really weird. He would come in and just sit and stare at me while holding women's underwear. I got permission to go into the back room whenever he entered the store. My coworker said he would ask where I was, and she would just say that I wasn't working that day. One day he said, "Well, I saw her come in about 2 hours ago, so I know she's here." He then proceeded to take women's underwear into the change room hidden in men's jeans and masturbate into them, leaving jizz-filled lacy panties wadded up in the corner. As he was leaving, he told the associate closest to the door that he wanted that fashion girl with the earrings to clean it up. Of course she didn't know what that meant until later. The next time he was spotted on our camera, security immediately escorted him out, and he was banned from the store. He would often sit outside and wait on the days I was closing, so I always had a manager big guy walk me out. I was in a bad car accident shortly after that and was let go because my fractured neck would somehow keep me from doing my job even once I was fully healed. That place was effed anyway. TL. Dr. Creepy Fat Bold Stalker Man jizzed in some panties for me. Sorry for the wall of text. Not about me, but rather my crazy ex-girlfriend. We'll call her Katrina. Like the hurricane. I dated this girl for around a month, but I broke it off as soon as I realized she was far more infatuated with me than I with her. We stayed friends afterwards, however, and talked a good amount still. Her brother was really cool, and I originally had liked her best friend, so I couldn't burn any bridges. Anyways, we all go to prom as a group of friends, not together. At prom, her date, we'll call him Bob, whom was a tad creepy at first glance, supposedly did unwanted things to her, kisses, etc. The next day I found out that during the car ride home, Bob had gone further with his agitation. Katrina told me through tears what happened, and later Bob tried to explain himself to me via text. Needless to say, I was distraught and comforted her. The story spread around, and a large chunk of our group of friends began to shun him. My seeping rage was hardly contained whenever we crossed paths at school, but I never made a direct confrontation. He graduated, and the drama died off a bit. I stopped communicating with Katrina for the most part, but I really started talking to her friend. Around 100 texts a day. One night, Bob hacked my Facebook account to talk to Katrina, since he was obsessed with her. He told her how much I, myself, hated her, and how Bob was right. I didn't like her, etc. She called me at 2 in the morning to ask if what I said was true, and of course, I had to deny it. I changed my password to Pi4Moreseca. Be right back. Right. So later Bob showed up at a football game and confronted her there after everyone else was gone. This happened after she had asked to watch the game with me, and I declined. I felt a little bad. The night before Thanksgiving, I got a text from Bob. It was very vague. Hey, do you still talk to Katrina? And this was months after I deleted his number, so I responded normally. I later realized the texts were from Bob, since they were extremely creepy. I'm outside her house. I knocked, and no one answered. Should I just go in? The lights just went off. I know someone is home. I had tried to tell Bob that she was out of town, visiting family for Thanksgiving. She had told me she was home alone, and I instructed her to lock the doors, grab a knife, and hide in a corner. No reply for an hour. I endlessly call her brother, her brother's girlfriend, and her best friend, hoping to get a hold of her. I call Bob, and he tells me that nothing happened. He's just leaving, but he hid her phone so she wouldn't call the police. When she finally calls me, she's crying endlessly. She explains every detail, how she can barely move her leg, how scared she is. I finally convince her to call the police. Afterwards, she calls me to update me on what happened. I wrote a 5-page witness affidavit and talked to a police officer through email and over the phone. Katrina told me how infatuated she was with the police officer, and he even asked me through email whether he would have a shot with Katrina. Life continued as normal. Bob was in jail, and we grew closer as friends. I even accidentally made out with her once. I even met someone new, my current girlfriend. When I first flirted with her, Katrina's friend, the one who I'd been texting every day, made me feel absolutely shy, explained how I'd crossed the friend line, and I even apologized to my current girlfriend because I'd been told I had made her feel awkward. It turns out that Katrina had told my current girlfriend I was only talking to her to make Katrina jealous. So when I had apologized the day after, she thought that was what I was referring to. But here's the kicker. Bob never did anything to Katrina. She'd lied about him to me for almost an entire year. Fake tears and everything. And what's more, she had hacked my own Facebook to talk to herself about how much I didn't like her. Whenever I'd corresponded with him, it had been her. Whenever I'd corresponded with her friend, it had been her. Whenever I'd corresponded with her brother, it had been her. Apparently she used her iPod to get many different phone numbers. When I found out, her brother was horrified. I never talked to her again, but I kept seeing her everywhere. She wrote a super bullshit sorry note, but I never responded. She's been to my house 4 effing times because we have some of the same friends, and no one understands the deep amount of hatred I have for her. She even impersonated a police officer. Who the F does that? Poor Bob. Everyone hated him. In high school, I met a girl who I fell for hard. Looking back on it now, it was clear she wasn't interested in being anything more than friends, nor would she ever be. But me being the obsessed person I was, I couldn't take a hint. So rather than turning into the nice guy Reddit usually demeans, I asked her out. She said no, and I was crushed of course, but she still wanted to be friends. So I was good with it, except my feelings never really went away. I would DM her every day about the most random and asinine stalk her Facebook constantly, strike up conversation IRL about stuff on there etc. Around our junior year, there was a party at the house of mutual friend, and she was super drunk. That night, she made out with a bunch of guys, but none of them were me, and that's when I got the idea. The next day, another mutual friend of ours asked me how the party was, and I said Kara, which is what I'll call her, tried to make out with me, but she was too drunk, and I said no. My friend said I was such a nice guy and her opinion of me was raised because of the incident. I felt good Reddit. In my eyes I was a hero. Not just any ordinary hero mind you, but one to the apple of my eye. The fire that drove me. Even if it never happened, I told about 4 or 5 other people until one day, I decided to tell Kara. I figured she was drunk enough to not remember much. Boy was I wrong. Not only did she remember everything, She told her boyfriend about my lie, to which he threatened to kick my a. Him I wasn't so worried about, but Kara said she never wanted to see me again. Despite my numerous tries at reconciliation, she wasn't having it. In my despair, I tried to kill myself. As I sat in the car waiting for carbon monoxide waiting to kill me, I realized that my parents would be devastated if I did this, and I shut off the car. That night, I broke down to my friend and confessed everything that I had done, even the part about me making up the Makiad story. About 2 weeks later, Kara contacts me again, and we argue over this. I say she was leading me on. She says I need help, etc. It goes on for a while, back and forth until finally, we decide to reconcile. Unfortunately for me, the feelings I had towards her were now coming back in full force. She had a new boyfriend this time, and I was thinking of things worse than making up a Makup story. Stuff like breaking this guy's legs, or coming up with elaborate plans to make him cheat on her. Until finally one day during a regular conversation with her, I asked how her boyfriend, who was a year older and already in college, was doing and how they were coping with a long distance relationship. She then described to me the love she had for him in such beautiful terms that I realized I would never have that with her, and I had been a fool to destroy such a wonderful friendship because she was a pretty awesome friend. Today, I'm a much happier man than Kara, and I are still friends to this day. Sometimes, however, I look back and get scared at the man I was because I was capable of so much bad stuff. It worries me.